Yo, what's up guys? Major apologies for this video coming out later than it was supposed to. It was supposed to come out on Sunday, but I realized this is a big topic to tackle, and I just wanted to make sure that everything was fact checked and made sure that that everything is legit, so that basically what I did was just try to point out any contradictories, and I probably do have plenty, but just wanted to make this as legit as possible, so that I can, give this to you guys, present it to you guys, and you guys can do your own fact checking as well. But today we're going to be talking about, as you see in the thumbnail and in the title, that Hide is alive. He is not dead. And in this video, I'm going to explain as to why he is not dead and what is he up to. So bear with me. This is probably going to be very long. I've left pretty much all the sources that I will be talking about, that I mentioned and I reference, in the description down below, so you can check them out yourself. This whole thing came to mind about like last week or a couple days ago. Taz, shout out to Taz, I'll leave the link to his Twitter down below. He sent me an interesting Tumblr post. Somebody observed something, and from another chapter previously, which I'll get to here in the video, but it made me just connect pieces together, bring things to fruition, and I finally came to the conclusion that Hide is alive and that he is up to something. He is out there doing something, at least what I believe. I was convinced, like many of us, that he died, because of that last chapter in chapter 75, where we saw Hide. It just implied to us that Hide died. He was eaten by Kaneki. And I was convinced and whatnot. I wasn't really going to touch upon it, but after seeing this theory and after talking to somebody in the comments on YouTube, it just kind of made me reinitiate it and really come up with a whole new theory as to what he is up to and why he's still alive. So without any further ado, let's jump into this. So first off, I'm going to be reading here because I actually wrote like notes and whatnot here. So if you could just hear me reading line through line, that's what I'm doing. So first off, the conversation between Kaneki and Hide in Tokyo Ghoul chapter 75 shows us that Hide manages to convince Kaneki to keep on living while also hinting that he supposedly died. So if you guys do remember, he said something about like to work hard in order to die stylishly for other people's sake, and then we see him saying, "Idiot, at that time I was actually thinking I want to live on with you." Right? So this whole scene in general basically it hints to us that Hide was killed by Kaneki, that he did give up his life so that Kaneki could fight Arima at the end of Tokyo Ghoul. But looking back on it and really observing it, I want to say a couple things here about this and why this actually proves more that Hide is actually alive. So first off, the biggest thing to note about this whole event is the fact that this conversation did not actually happen. Remember that. It was Kaneki speaking to himself all along. Remember that during this time, he wasn't literally speaking to Hide. Now, most of us already know this. He was speaking in his head. But, in case people forgot or whatnot, he never really spoke to Hide. Hide never technically said this, okay? He never actually said this because he never has seen Hide since that event, and to bring up examples of that, he spoke to Rize in Tokyo Ghoul. Oh, not that one. He spoke to Rize in Tokyo Ghoul when he was being tortured by Jason, and he had this long conversation with her, and then at the end of all of this, he became white-haired Kaneki. But if you do remember, Rize wasn't even there during that time. She was with Dr. Kano, and Kaneki seemingly had this conversation with her, and she basically convinced him to become white-haired Kaneki, right? To live for the sake of others, blah, 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 blah. And the main thing that we need to take out of this, another event, is also himself, before I kind of move on. the other event is also himself. We see in multiple cases in Tokyo Ghoul and in Tokyo Ghoul Re where Kaneki speaks to a younger version of himself, or like a white-haired version of himself, and this white-haired version of himself always convinces him to take a course of action, whether that be changing his whole entire personality or really taking things into his own hands. again, these events are all in his mind. But what we really need to take out of all of this, out of all these events we have seen here, is the fact that Kaneki, at the end of the day, he has always been convincing himself. The changes and everything that happened to him, the way he becomes, his new character, his new personality, that is all at the end of the day because of him. Now, obviously, this comes also in mind because of being influenced from other people, him becoming white-haired Kaneki because of him being influenced by Rize and whatnot. But at the end of the day, the person who decided to become this person, the person who decided to change his personality and change his character, was him. Now, here's the thing, a very, very interesting thing. The fact that since the beginning of Tokyo Ghoul, he's always had a personality disorder. It wasn't just in Tokyo Ghoul itself, right, when we saw Kaneki and he met Rize and everything, that this started. No, it always happened. He was always living a lie. If you remember when he was a kid and he was with his mother, supposedly, during this flashback with Rize, supposedly she was like the best thing in his life, the ray of hope, right? But then we come to find out later on, way later on in Tokyo Ghoul Re, that was actually a lie, and he was actually being abused by his mother. There might have been moments where she did show him some kind of care and loving, but probably most of the time, just because of her overworking herself or whatever, she took out all her stress and her anger on Kaneki. So he hid his own personality. He hid all his desires and who he truly was, and became this shell, this just outside form of a person who showed no sense of empathy or sympathy towards anybody or even himself. And he was always like this, not really showing much, not really expressing much. So right from the get-go, you already have someone who was already experiencing some type of personality disorder or some type of mental blockage, because of the fact that in order for him to keep on moving on with his life, continuing on, he had to kind of make this whole life to himself. He had to make this whole life of his mother being there for him and her caring for him, and his mother being the ray of hope for him when he was younger. He had to make this all up so that he could convince himself that everything was fine, so that he could convince himself that she died because of these circumstances of her overworking himself, and that also maybe because of the fact that she wanted to die because she didn't really care about Kaneki, so she didn't really see a point of being there for him any longer. And so, right from the get-go, if you already have somebody like this, they're obviously going to have very, very, very impactful and life-changing events in terms of their personality once they're thrown into a situation like this, like Kaneki has been thrown into. And it's very interesting to take note of this, because if you notice, whenever he had to take a course of action, whenever there was a change in him, whenever he became somebody else or went into his mind, there was never actually someone physically there by his side that changed him per se, and it wasn't really flashbacks per se that changed him. Like, another series, when characters change or they go into a new form or something like that, usually there's like their friends are there, or like the villains like pressuring them, or they think of some previous event or something like that. But an interesting thing about Kaneki is the fact that whenever this happens, the person who ends up influencing him the most is him. Because these people who he has in his mind, like Rize or Jason, like when he was being eaten alive by Jason in his mind when he was about to go fight Animai before he met Hide, or the younger version of himself. These people, they're just fragments of him. They're just broken pieces of him, and that just shows you how broken of a character he is, for him to have mental manifestations of other characters who in turn influence him, even though those mental manifestations are just character personality traits of himself. That just shows you how broken he is. Because first off, to show you an example of this, Rize. Remember when he spoke to Rize? I always found that to be a very interesting conversation, because when he spoke to her and the way that she came across him, you know, like her personality and the way that she was, this manifested from such a very small encounter between him and her. Because remember, he didn't know Rize that well. He only had a couple of encounters with her when he didn't know that she was a ghoul before, and then during the date. And then he only knew her as a ghoul when she attacked him. That was the only instance in which he knew her as a ghoul. Other than that, the other ways in which he found out how Rize was through what other people told him, like Itori or Renji or Shu. You know, what all these other people told him about Rize was what manifested into the Rize that he saw when he was being tortured by Kaneki. But that's very interesting to see how such a very small encounter and what other people would say about her created this character that was seemingly the same type of character that she was actually in real life. And this person and this character manifested into his mind. But if you take into consideration that this is all going on in his mind, this isn't a mental representation of Rize. This is also a personality trait of himself, a twisted side of himself, a twisted side of his conscience that was telling him, listen, you do need to fight for, you know, yourself. You instead of being eaten alive by others, you need to go out there and eat. Become the ghoul. Become that person you did not want to become, because that's the only way you will live. Okay, it's very interesting if you take that into consideration, because if you put Hide into this perspective, into this, you come to realize that Hide not only is a mental manifestation of what he would perceive Hide to say to him, but this is also another character trait of himself. His own conscience is telling him through the manifestation of his best friend what to do. But at the end of the day, it's his own conscience that's telling him this. Except for he's so broken that he doesn't even have his own self-conscious telling him this. He has his conscious manifest these other people he's known to tell him to do things, to tell him to move on, to tell him to change his personality. Okay, that's a very, very interesting thing. Now, what Hide told him during this hallucination that he had, in which he became, the red-haired Kaneki that we saw that fought Arima, what Hide told him wouldn't surprise me if Hide told him that in real life, that he actually saw Hide and Hide actually told him that. But it doesn't change the fact that Kaneki manifested Hide from his own consciousness to convince himself to keep on living, instead of he himself, through his own will, through his own power, through his own consciousness, tell himself to decide on doing this on his own. See, that's the crazy thing when you think about it. He had to have his conscience manifest people in his life to convince himself, instead of he himself deciding to become who he is. So he still hasn't fully committed. He still hasn't fully realized his own self-worth and his own self-acceptance. He still fully hasn't done that, because he is still seemingly creating these personas out of his consciousness to tell him what to do. You know, it's he's still living a lie. And because of this just represents Hide, and the person who we saw him the last time we saw him, and you know how he was in Tokyo Ghoul. That character that we saw is who we saw here. But is there more to Hide than meets the eye? Now I will get to that, because this is where it adds to why Hide is still alive. So moving on, in chapter 137 of Tokyo Ghoul, after his brief encounter with Hide, right at the beginning of his fight with Arima, Kaneki notes to himself that his wounds he had from Amon were healed, and that the sweet taste of blood coated my mouth, which also implies that he must have eaten Hide, right? So if you guys remember, let me show you guys the panels here. Right after that conversation he has with Hide, and Hide says, "It's alright, man, blah, blah, blah." He says, you know, "Can you fight for me one more time?" Then we see, once Hide encounters Arima, that he says that his injuries had healed, and we see that he is fully healed, and that the sweet taste of blood coated my mouth. And then he said Hide was gone and he was all alone. Right? This is also another big fact which a lot of people just assume to confirm that Hide was eaten alive by Kaneki. So, with this being said, first off, let's talk about ghouls and how they eat. So, ghouls are shown that in order to satisfy their hunger, they don't necessarily have to eat an entire human, just enough to be satisfied, kind of like a regular human eating food on a daily basis, like a daily calorie intake. We as humans don't have to eat like a huge amount in order to be satisfied, but it also depends on body types as well, and just your metabolism, your weight, and all that. It just, there's a lot of factors that go into how much calories you intake, but the average person doesn't necessarily have to eat an entire fridge in order to be full. This all just depends on how much the ghoul eats, but portion control is possible, kind of like how humans use portion control. Obvious fact being the people in Anteku, where they ate packaged meat. Now, this isn't an entire human that was in that package, but it was a piece of it. This is what Yoshimura gave to Kaneki, and this is what they would frequently eat at Anteku. When Renji would go hunting out for food, they wouldn't eat an entire human. Now, there are differences where, like, Shu and his club, they ate like almost entire human because they were just savages. Rize would consume way more than what any other ghoul would, which basically broke the rules of pretty much every ward out there, and the ghouls that had established these rules did. But portion control is possible for a ghoul. A ghoul does not necessarily have to eat an entire human in order to be satisfied. Okay, so from that, we know that ghouls, they can consume to satisfy their hunger for a brief second. Another thing that they can use is coffee, which they still retain the taste as well. But basically, what I'm trying to say all of this is, a ghoul doesn't necessarily have to eat an entire human in order to be satisfied. Now, when it comes to healing, however, it's a big difference. It's a major difference because they have lost RC cells, and RC cells are what basically keeps ghouls alive because they have more RC cells than a regular human. But when it comes to healing, then they would obviously have to eat a lot more. But here's where Kaneki comes into play, and this is something that has been shown to us and basically foreshadowed and set up, which I believe explains as to where Kaneki, where Hide is, and why he is alive. So, Kaneki, during that moment, although he was pierced, severely wounded, he did not have to eat all of Hide so that he could be fully healed. Why? Why is that? Well, first off, he has Rize's healing factor. Okay? Rize's healing factor is incredibly immense. She has probably the best healing factor out of anybody in the entire series. I don't know what that is. As we saw, an example of this healing effect is when Kaneki was being tortured by Jason. And Kaneki and Jason would cut off his fingers and cut off his toes, and he would regrow them. In a span of time, he would regrow them fully. And so that just shows you, that's just a little example that shows us, how immense his healing abilities are. But obviously, these kind of wounds that Jason was giving him in terms of like his fingers don't really compare to that giant wound he had after he fought Amon and encountered Hide. But what the most recent chapters have shown us is that Kaneki, when it comes to healing and being able to still keep on going, he is able to also regrow his entire limbs while having not eaten in such a long time. If you guys recall, during his fight with Arima, when he came back, he basically regrew his entire body, including his hands and his legs, despite being severely injured, which he lost a ton of blood, and also not having eaten in quite a while. Kaneki was still able to do this. Now, obviously, in terms of experience, the current Kaneki that was able to do this is a lot more experience, has been through a lot more than Kaneki towards the end of Tokyo Ghoul when he was gonna fight Arima. But during the times of desperation, during the times when his body is really calling out who's to say that his body wasn't able to heal and push itself to heal himself again from just a little bit amount that he could consume? Now, another example that I do want to note, I didn't actually have the panel here, but you guys can check it out and you guys probably remember, is also, remember during the fight between Toka, Kaneki, and Shu, where Toka was wounded and she needed to heal, so she ate just a piece of Kaneki. All she did was eat a tiny piece of Kaneki, and she was able to regrow again her Kagone and everything. She was able to heal or get enough stamina to fight Shu. Now, all she did was eat a portion of him. Now, that makes sense as to why she was able to heal, because he has an incredible high RC cell count compared to Hide, and Toka was able to heal just from that, since he has more RC cells than a regular human. But with these two factors, but here's the thing: if this is true that he only ate a portion of Hide, then either two possibilities are actually possible here. One is that Kaneki maybe was able to eat a piece of Hide, and also from this just piece of Hide, he was able to force his RC cells to heal himself to this point where he had enough stamina to fight Arima. Or, as we have come to learn, and this comes all into fruition, this all kind of adds up, is maybe Hide wasn't a full human. Now, let's move on to the final big thing that puts everything all together. Okay, so there's been a recent observation, source for that down below, that has been pointed out, in which Kaneki was foreshadowed to be the One-Eyed King ever since Tokyo Ghoul. This is seen during his flashback with Rize, where he is in a play wearing a robe with the same symbol that the One-Eyed King has. In this play, Kaneki was forced into playing the main character, although it is never mentioned in both times that the play is brought up in the series what the main character was. So remember, during this flashback, this event is shown twice. It is shown when Kaneki is talking to Rize, and it is shown when Hide was talking to Toka about this play. Very interesting how this play was brought up twice. It's just a basic play, but very interesting to see that Kaneki was actually wearing on his robe, had the same symbol of the One-Eyed King, which basically foreshadowed that he was the One-Eyed King. But here's an interesting thing. They do mention what role Hide is in. Remember, Rita asked Kaneki, and Kaneki says that he's the witch's servant. But it is never said what position he played, even though he played the main character of the story. But they just never say what character that character is, right? Interestingly enough, in the scripts that were cut out in Tokyo Ghoul Route A, and there's a source for that as well, that were taken out in Tokyo Ghoul Route A, written by Ishida himself, it is said that the role in Kaneki played was a prince. There's a source for this as well, so you can check it out for yourself. Interestingly enough, the role that Hide plays is a witch's servant, with his face painted to resemble a jester or a clown, and that role is brought up in the manga. So Hide's role is explained, but Kaneki's never is. But supposedly in this script of Ishida that was taken out, Kaneki played a prince. And here's the story as well that is also shown in the script. Basically, the prince and the witch's servant used to be friends until the servant was tricked into betraying the prince by the witch. But then the prince confronts him, and the servant begs for forgiveness. And the prince accepts as long as he promises to never betray him again, or something along those lines. So, with this being said in mind, now this was taken out of the story, right? So we don't know if it'll actually be canon or not, but it's possible it could still be canon since it was taken out of the series itself. It's something that Ishida could translate to us as well, because remember, foreshadowing doesn't necessarily have to come just from the story as well. It has come from the calendar that he has presented. It has come from the tarot cards. It has come from multiple amounts of other sources, other things that he has done that have foreshadowed future events. Even just art panels that he has done, poems and whatnot that he has done, basically have foreshadowed events. So maybe this was something that he might have been foreshadowing in the anime, because there are things in the anime that foreshadow future events in the manga. although the anime wasn't done that well. But maybe there was things he was trying to hide in there or throw in there to kind of show us later on what he was trying to foreshadow. So if this is actually canon, we're going on the assumption that this actually ends up being something that is brought up again, the story or what role Kaneki played in as. And if we translate this into a symbolic form, into a symbolic format as to who Kaneki is and who Hide is, first off, it makes sense. Kaneki is the one-eyed king. As he was playing in this play, he was playing a prince, and you can kind of obviously find a similarity between a prince, the connection between a prince and a king. But Hide is playing the witch's servant, which is very interesting. And he is also painted as a clown. Very, very, very interesting. Because if Hide is the witch's servant, who is the witch? And how do these two roles, how do these two characters come into mind in the real life perspective of the story? If Kaneki basically translates in this play into the one-eyed king, who does Hide and the witch that he is serving to come into mind? Who does he play into the story in real life? And one could assume it could be Eto as being the witch, but that wouldn't really make any sense since Eto is backing Kaneki into becoming the one-eyed king. Remember, she basically did everything she could to set up Kaneki as to becoming the one-eyed king. But Hide is a different case, because he doesn't really have much to do with the story. As you know, from all of Tokyo Ghoul Re, he hasn't really been involved that much, except for changing Kaneki, right? But if we assume this is a clown face that he has, we could also assume that he was maybe under the leadership of Itori from the Clowns, where Itori could play a major role in the future of the series, Itori from the Clowns. Because here's the thing, there have been many cases in which characters in the story seemingly don't seem to have any kind of big involvement into the story, but then later on they turn out to be very important. Biggest case being Furuta from the Clowns, who was basically very uninvolved in Tokyo Ghoul, and we didn't see him hardly ever in Tokyo Ghoul. And then Tokyo Ghoul Re actually turns out to be one of the biggest characters we have seen so far. Yet we haven't seen much of Uta, who was very important in Tokyo Ghoul and yet didn't really come out at all in Tokyo Ghoul Re. Donato as well, who very, very little came out in Tokyo Ghoul, and then now in Tokyo Ghoul Re comes out to be one of the most important characters as well. He's actually a clown, okay? So it's another thing that it wouldn't surprise me if it was somebody else from the Clouds does turn out to be another major character, seeing as how we've had other side characters become very important in the long run. So, but I'm just throwing that out there. I'm not really sure who that witch's servant could be. Now, another thing that I do want to show you guys is the fact that if we assemble this into tarot cards, Hide has been associated with the magician. As you can see, there's a number pointed there. He has been associated with the magician. Now, if you guys have watched my my Tokyo Ghoul Re, the Tokyo Ghoul Fool's Journey series, where I talk about all the tarot cards and what they're associated with and whatnot, you can see that the magician in its reversed state, the attributes that are associated with the magician in its reversed state, because not only does tarot cards have meanings when they're faced upright, but they also have meanings when they're faced reversed as well. So when it's reversed, it symbolizes the traits that are associated with the magician. When it's reversed, they symbolize imposter, deceit, and manipulation. Let me repeat that. When reversed, the tarot card the magician, which Hide is supposedly connected to, they symbolize imposter, deceit, and manipulation. Very interesting traits for such an open and honest character, wouldn't you say? Because Hide has always been very open, and we have seen so much dialogue from him, inner dialogue from him, monologue from him as well. He's been such a very prominent and very outspoken character when we have seen him in Tokyo Ghoul. And yet these traits are associated with him as the magician when the card is reversed. And remember I said that the reverse traits come into play in Tokyo Ghoul. So with this being said in mind, is there more to Hide than meets the eye? Another thing, remember Hide telling Toka about Kaneki touching his chin when lying? I'll show you guys that here. Remember he said that when he's lying or something like that, he's hiding something, he always touches his chin. Now, very interesting. Hide seems to have the same sort of mannerism of touching his chin when expressing something. We have actually seen it twice here. He doesn't really touch his chin. He touches like either his temple, the side of his temple, or his cheek, ever since he was young. So could this mannerism been something Kaneki had noticed from Hide and picked up when he was a kid? Because he's known Hide for such a long time, a very long time. Interestingly enough, he's like a childhood friend of his. So could have Kaneki noticed something like this from Hide when he was younger and decided to kind of take it on for himself as well, just in a different way? And if so, would that mean that what Hide does is also lying whenever he touches his cheek or his chin? Could be. Could be. Another thing is the Abyss quote. Let me get into this here. So when Hide encounters Kaneki at the end of Tokyo Ghoul, he says, hey, can you help me out? Can you do this one more time? And then he says, since there is only one way into the abyss. Very interesting piece of dialogue here at the end of Tokyo Ghoul. Because it says here, because this is what I wrote here. The Abyss quote that is mentioned at the end of Hide and Kaneki's final meet in Tokyo Ghoul might reference Nietzsche's quote from his book Beyond Good and Evil. Nietzsche was a very big famous philosopher back in the day. He still is. He wrote this book called Beyond Good and Evil that tackles Christianity and a lot of philosophical topics. But he says in this quote, beware that when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster. For when you gaze long into the abyss also gazes into you. Okay, now I'm assuming that this quote is a reference. This quote that is said at the end of Tokyo Ghoul references this quote by Nietzsche, because it wouldn't be of any surprise, first off, seeing as how Nietzsche did influence Hermann Hesse, who wrote the book Damien, which is also a possible inspiration for Ishida. I've talked about that before. You can go check out that video. I'll leave it in the description down below. But basically, this book pretty much follows Tokyo Ghoul through and through. I mean, Tokyo Ghoul is very, very similar to the book Damien. But seeing as how Nietzsche did influence the author who wrote the book, that Ishida might have been influencing him, I wouldn't be surprised if Ishida read some of Nietzsche as well. So, I mean, it just wouldn't, it would make sense. This connection does seem very, very highly likely. But the quote's meaning is the most interesting thing, because it conveys that if one focuses on what they hate for too long, if one focuses on one thing for too long, they end up becoming that same thing. Okay, if one ends up looking into the abyss looks back at you. So with this quote at the end, it's not saying you look into the abyss. It says that there's only one way into the abyss. So was Hide convincing Kaneki to descend into madness? Because the abyss here was going into madness because it was insane to go fight Arima, because he knew he was gonna die. I mean, as soon as he encountered Arima, he recognized who Arima was, and he realized what kind of person Arima was. Okay, so with this being said, with this quote at the end, was Hide telling Kaneki to descend into madness? Was he telling him, listen, you've already looked into the abyss, now you just got to go in it. You just got to go in it. Become that person you did not want to be. You least did not want to be. Very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. Also, remember that both Arima and Eto were preparing for Kaneki this entire time to become the One-Eyed King. We just found out that, and I've been saying that for the longest too, but it was just confirmed this most recent chapter that Arima and Eto were seemingly working together to prepare Kaneki to become the One-Eyed King. Like they said, we were keeping the throne warm. So who's to say there weren't other people involved in this plan or had their own agenda when it comes to Kaneki himself? But why Kaneki, out of all people? Why Kaneki? I mean, he's just a regular Joe at the end of the day. I mean, he didn't really have much going. So there's got to be some connection. And that connection might come to do with Hide or possibly Kaneki's father. Moving on, notice how Kaneki didn't want to kill Arima for 2 reasons. One, he did come to respect Arima in the end. This is talking about the most recent chapter of Tokyo Ghoul. And number 2, he does not want to kill any humans, which he hasn't done so far. In the story of Tokyo Ghoul, notice how Kaneki has never once, he's gotten close, but he has never ever once he's never killed a human before. He himself. He has seen humans die by the hands of other ghouls, but he himself has never killed a human. He has never actually killed a human. So, and he didn't end up killing Anima, even though Anima was technically not a human. He was like half human, half ghoul, or whatever. It was just weird. But he hasn't killed any human. Now, it'd be very interesting, and it would make for a good story as well, if the one person he did actually kill, the one human he did actually kill was Hide, because he'd be the only human, and he was his best friend. But that is to say, if Hide is actually human. There are theories that have been going on for the longest, and I'll leave sources into the description down below. You guys can check them out. I don't want to go too far into them just because they're really long. But that Hide has possible relations to the Washu. Like, he has possible connections and things to point out. Like, you know, how he got into the CCG real fast and whatnot. You know, you can just go check it out for yourself. But given that what we know about the Washu right now, that they are a part of E, and that some members of the Washu clan are actually ghouls. Maybe all of them are. I don't think so, because I remember Matsuri, or I think that's his name. Matsuri didn't look like a ghoul at all. So there are definitely ghouls in the Washu clan who are the like high members of V, and that they are ghouls as well. So could it be possible that Hide might have been a ghoul, or maybe half ghoul or half human himself? It is possible, because here's the thing. If this is true, if Kaneki did eat a part of Hide, then he would be able to heal himself pretty immensely, because you know, Hide would have more RC cells than a regular human, so he wouldn't have to eat all of Hide to be fully healed. He would just have to eat a piece of him. And also, Hide would be able to recover, since he'd be able to heal, since he was a ghoul. Another thing is, this would also give another reason as to him being able to pass through the CCG real easily, because he would also have been granted permission to enter the CCG, because he was also registered into the RC cell scanners. Another thing. Also, at the end of the day, this would make a very interesting story, because if you think about it, if it was set like this, the final opponent Kaneki would have to face to as the One-Eyed King would be the one person he cared about the most, which would be Hide. It would also impact Kaneki the most, which like literally would fully break him, seeing that his one true friend throughout his life actually was just watching him from afar and preparing him to become this character who he ended up becoming at the end of the day. Like, if you think about just the way the story would be if it was actually true that he was alive and that he had something to do with the Washu/V, very interesting. It would play out very interesting. It would also make for a very good story. And it's not as predictable as one may think as well. So that's something to keep in mind. So, yeah, with all that being said, I do believe he is alive. And I do believe that there is more to Hide than meets the eye. Definitely there is. There's just gotta be. Okay? So that's all I gotta say, guys. You take it in for yourself, whatever you wanna think. But let me know in the comments down below what you guys think. Letting you know. Keeping it out there. All the sources you can read are down in the description down below. Yeah, let me know your thoughts and everything. And I'll see you guys next time. Peace.